My father once told me that seeds need darkness to grow. He said this to me when I was 7 years old, standing in the garden of our family home in Salem, Oregon, watching him plant pumpkin seeds in the soil. It was a Saturday afternoon in late April, and the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. My father was kneeling in the dirt, his hands already stained with soil from hours of preparation. He was the kind of man who did things deliberately, carefully, with the kind of attention to detail that most people reserve for their most important work. But this was important to him, this garden, these seeds, this transfer of knowledge from one generation to the next. He said that seeds spend months beneath the earth, in complete darkness, before they ever see the light. He explained that during those months of darkness, the seed is not dormant or wasting time. The seed is growing. The seed is developing roots. The seed is preparing itself for the moment when it will finally emerge into the sunlight. He said that the darkness is not a punishment. The darkness is a necessary part of the process. The darkness is what allows growth to happen. Without the darkness, he told me, seeds would never develop the strength they need to survive in the sunlight. I remember being confused by this at the time. I remember asking him why darkness was necessary. I remember asking him why the seed couldn't just grow in the light. And he had smiled at me in the way that adults smile at children when they are asking questions that seem simple but are actually quite profound. Because, he had said, growth that happens too quickly, without the right foundation, is growth that cannot be sustained. The darkness forces the seed to develop internally first, before it has to face the external challenges of the world. The darkness is a gift, not a curse. The darkness is what makes the eventual growth possible. I think about that conversation a lot now. I think about it because I understand in a way that I did not understand as a 7-year-old girl, that my father was teaching me something profound. He was teaching me that what happens in the darkness, what happens beneath the surface, what happens when no one is watching, those things matter. Those things shape everything that comes afterward. He was teaching me that the most important growth happens in places where no one can see it, in times when the world believes nothing is happening. He was teaching me that patience and darkness and faith are the prerequisites for beauty and strength and life. My name is Evelyn Moore. I am 35 years old. I am the Chief Financial Officer of Moore Harvest, an agricultural corporation that was founded by my father, Edward Moore, 60 years ago, or at least, I was the Chief Financial Officer. 3 years ago, I was removed from that position. 3 years ago, I was cast out from the company that my family had spent generations building. 3 years ago, I was told that I was not welcome in the world that my father had created. I am telling you this story because what happened 3 years ago was only the beginning. I am telling you this story because the darkness that my father spoke about is finally about to bloom into something visible, something undeniable, something that will force everyone to confront the truth about what really happened the day my father died. Edward Moore died in what was officially classified as an industrial accident. It was October 31st, 3 years ago. It was Halloween. It was a day that should have been about celebration and costumes and the crossing of the boundary between the living and the dead. Instead, it became the day when my father died. He died at the Moore Harvest processing plant. He was inspecting one of the grain silos when the silo exploded. The explosion was catastrophic. It killed him instantly. It also killed 2 workers who were nearby. The investigation that followed concluded that the explosion was the result of a structural failure caused by inadequate maintenance. The conclusion was that this was an accident, an unfortunate accident, but an accident nonetheless. There was no criminal investigation. There was no suggestion of wrongdoing. The matter was handled through the insurance company, and the Workplace Safety Administration settled on a determination that Moore Harvest had violated certain safety protocols, but that these violations were not egregious enough to warrant criminal prosecution. Life moved on. Moore Harvest moved on. The company found new leadership. My brother, Lucas Moore, took over as Chief Executive Officer, and I was removed from my position on the board of directors. The removal happened 3 days after my father's funeral. The funeral was held on a gray, rainy day in Salem. The sky was the color of ash. The ground was waterlogged and muddy. The pumpkin patch that my father had maintained on the property for decades was beginning to wither and decay at the end of the season. I stood in that muddy cemetery, and I watched as they lowered my father's casket into the ground. I stood there and I listened as Lucas gave the eulogy. I stood there and I felt something break inside me. "My father," Lucas said, his voice trembling with what appeared to be genuine emotion, was a man who understood the importance of reputation. He understood that a family's name, a family's legacy, is something that must be protected at all costs. He understood that sometimes difficult decisions must be made in order to ensure that the future of this company and this family remains secure. I remember thinking that there was something odd about the way Lucas was framing the funeral. The eulogy was not about my father as a person. The eulogy was about my father's legacy as a business asset. The eulogy was about reputation. After the funeral, I went to my mother's house. My mother's name is Judith Moore. She is 62 years old. She is a woman who spent most of her adult life helping to run Moore Harvest alongside my father. She is a woman who is intelligent and capable and who should have been involved in the major decisions facing the company after my father's death. Instead, she was sitting alone in her house, staring out the window at the rain. "Mom," I said to her, "why did Lucas talk about reputation at the funeral? Why did he make it sound like Dad's death was about protecting the family business, instead of about mourning the loss of Dad himself?" My mother looked at me with an expression that I had never seen before. It was an expression of deep sadness, but also of something else. It was an expression of someone who was carrying a terrible secret. "Sit down," she said. "I need to tell you something." She told me the truth about my father's death. She told me that 3 weeks before the silo explosion, my father had discovered something troubling. He had discovered that my brother had made a decision to cut maintenance costs on the grain silos in order to improve the company's quarterly earnings. He had discovered that Lucas had deliberately reduced the frequency of structural inspections and repairs in order to save money. My father had confronted Lucas about this decision. My father had told Lucas that cutting maintenance costs was putting people's lives at risk. My father had told Lucas that this was a violation of the company's core values. My father had told Lucas that this decision had to be reversed immediately. My mother told me that Lucas had refused. Lucas had argued that the maintenance cuts were necessary to remain competitive. Lucas had argued that my father was being overly cautious. Lucas had argued that the risks were minimal, and that the financial benefits of the cuts were significant. The two men had argued. The argument had become heated. And then, my mother said, Lucas had gone to the silo. And while Lucas was working on something related to the structure, my father had gone out to check on the work. And while my father was inspecting the silo, it had exploded. The explosion was an accident, my mother told me. But it was an accident that happened because Lucas had cut corners. It was an accident that happened because Lucas had prioritized profit over safety. It was an accident that happened because my husband confronted Lucas about a decision that Lucas had made, and Lucas refused to acknowledge that the decision was wrong. "Why didn't you tell anyone this?" I asked her. "Why didn't you go to the authorities?" My mother looked at me with tears in her eyes. She looked like a woman who had been holding back these tears for 3 years, who had been carrying this weight of knowledge and complicity for 3 years, who had finally found someone she could tell the truth to. "Because," she said, her voice breaking as she spoke, "Lucas came to me the day after the explosion. He came to the house while I was still trying to understand what had happened, while I was still trying to process the fact that my husband was dead, while I was still in shock. And he sat down beside me and he told me everything." She paused, gathering strength for what came next. "He told me that if I reported what I knew, if I told anyone about the maintenance cuts, more harvest would be destroyed. He told me that the company would face massive lawsuits. He told me that the stock price would collapse. He told me that thousands of employees would lose their jobs. He told me that the company that your father spent his entire life building would be dismantled. And he told me that your father would have wanted the company to survive, even if it meant that the truth about how he died would be buried along with him." "That's manipulation," I said. "That's Lucas using the memory of Dad to convince you to protect him." "I know that now," my mother said. "But at the time, I was so broken. I was so devastated by the loss of your father that I could not think clearly. I could not separate my own desires from what Lucas was telling me. I could not see that he was lying to me." "So you chose to stay silent," I said. "I chose to protect the company," my mother said, and there was a note of defensiveness in her voice, as if she was still trying to justify to herself the choices she had made. "I chose to honor what your father had built by making sure that more harvest continued to exist. I paid money to settle with the families of the workers who died, $3 million total. I made sure that the investigation concluded that the explosion was an accident caused by structural failure, not by negligence. I hired lawyers to ensure that no criminal charges would be filed. I hired consultants to help manage the public relations crisis. I did everything I could to protect more harvest." "And what about protecting me?" I asked. "What about protecting the truth? What about protecting Dad's memory?" "I thought I was protecting all of those things," my mother said. "I thought that if more harvest survived, if the company continued to provide jobs and produce food and serve its customers, then your father's legacy would live on. I thought that the company was the most important thing he left behind. I thought that preserving the company was the best way to honor him." "But it wasn't," I said. "You honored the company at the expense of the truth. You preserved more harvest by allowing a lie to become the official story of how Dad died. You made yourself complicit in Dad's murder through your silence." My mother flinched at the word murder, but she didn't argue with it. She understood on some level that Lucas's negligence had essentially murdered my father, and that her silence had been a form of enabling that murder. "I know," she said quietly, "and I have regretted that choice every single day for the past 3 years." "And Lucas?" I asked. "Lucas became the chief executive officer," my mother said. "And you were removed from the company because Lucas told me that if you had any position of authority, you would eventually discover the truth about what had happened. He told me that you would expose him. He told me that the only way to protect the company was to remove you." I felt something break inside me in that moment. I felt the realization that my brother had killed my father, or at least that my brother's negligence had created the circumstances that led to my father's death. I felt the realization that my mother had known this and had chosen to stay silent. I felt the realization that I had been cast out of my family's company not because I had done anything wrong, but because I was a threat to my brother's secret. I left my mother's house that day, and I did not return for 3 years. I spent those 3 years in San Francisco. I spent those 3 years building a new life, a new career, a new identity, outside of Moore Harvest and outside of Salem. I spent those 3 years telling myself that I had moved on, that I had accepted what had happened, that I had forgiven my family for what they had done. I was lying to myself. The truth was that every day for 3 years, I carried the knowledge that my brother had killed my father. The truth was that every day for 3 years, I carried the knowledge that my mother had helped cover it up. The truth was that every day for 3 years, I carried the knowledge that my father's death had been reduced to a business calculation, a problem to be solved, a threat to reputation that had to be contained. And 3 years ago, I made a decision that would change everything. I decided that I was going to come back to Salem. I decided that I was going to expose the truth about what had happened to my father. I decided that I was going to make sure that my brother faced consequences for his role in my father's death. I decided that I was going to restore my father's memory by telling the truth about how he had really died. I didn't know at that moment how much it would cost me to pursue this goal. I didn't know how many people I would have to involve. I didn't know how many secrets I would have to expose. I didn't know how many lies I would have to uncover. But I made the decision anyway. Because seeds, my father had taught me, need darkness to grow. And I had been living in darkness for 3 years. It was time to emerge into the light. 3 years had passed since my father's death. 3 years had passed since I had left Salem. 3 years had passed since I had cut off contact with my family and with Moore Harvest. During those 3 years, Moore Harvest had continued to thrive. My brother had implemented new business practices. He had expanded the company's product line. He had increased the company's market share. By all external measures, Moore Harvest was more successful than it ever been. But underneath the surface, something was changing. Underneath the surface, there were cracks forming. Underneath the surface, there were people who were beginning to question the decisions being made at Moore Harvest. The first person to reach out to me was someone named Amber Pierce. Amber had worked as the head of information technology and public relations at Moore Harvest. According to the email she sent me, she had recently been fired after discovering evidence of accounting irregularities that she believed were connected to my brother's management decisions. In her email, Amber explained that she had backed up server logs before she left the company. She explained that the logs contained evidence of financial manipulation and accounting fraud that went back several years. She explained that she had contacted Lucas to ask him about these irregularities, and he had responded by firing her and threatening to prosecute her for theft of company data if she ever spoke about what she had discovered. "I'm not doing this because I'm a good person," Amber wrote in her email. "I'm not doing this because I believe in justice or truth or any of those noble concepts. I'm doing this because I hate people who present themselves as virtuous while engaging in fraud and corruption. I'm doing this because I hate pretenders. If you want to use this information to expose Lucas Moore, I'm willing to provide it to you. But I need to be clear about my motivation. I'm not here to help you. I'm here because I enjoy watching liars fall." I met Amber in person at a coffee shop in Oakland, not far from where I was living at the time. She was younger than I expected, probably in her early 30s, with an intensity in her eyes that suggested she had been burned by something in her past, that she had experienced disappointment or betrayal that had fundamentally altered the way she saw the world. She was sitting at a corner table, away from the windows, away from where casual observers might see her. She was wearing sunglasses even though we were indoors. She was clearly nervous about being seen, about being associated with whatever we were about to discuss. "Thank you for meeting me," she said when I sat down across from her. "I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure you would believe me." "Why are you doing this?" I asked her directly. "Why would you risk your career, your safety, your reputation to expose what you discovered at Moore Harvest?" Amber removed her sunglasses. Her eyes were cold, analytical, angry. "Because I hate liars," she said bluntly. "Because I hate people who present themselves as virtuous while engaging in fraud and corruption. Because I hate pretenders. I worked at Moore Harvest for 6 years. I was good at my job. I was promoted twice. I was told that I had a bright future there." She paused, taking a sip of her coffee, gathering her thoughts. "Then I discovered the fraud," she continued. "I discovered that Lucas had been manipulating financial data, inflating revenue numbers, hiding expenses. I discovered that the board of directors was being deliberately misled about the true financial state of the company. I discovered that the company's valuation was based on lies." "What did you do?" I asked. "I did what I should have done," Amber said. "I reported it. I went to the chief financial officer and I explained what I had discovered. I provided evidence. I thought that once the leadership knew about the fraud, they would take action to correct it." "But they didn't," I said. "No," Amber said. "They didn't. Instead, Lucas called me into his office. He told me that I was being fired for incompetence and mishandling of sensitive data. He told me that if I spoke about what I had discovered, he would prosecute me for theft of proprietary information and for attempting to extort the company. He told me that my career in technology would be over, that no company would ever hire me, that I would spend the rest of my life unemployable and unemployable." "He was threatening you," I said. "He was destroying me," Amber corrected me. "He was not just threatening me. He was executing a plan to destroy me. He had lawyers draw up documents alleging that I had stolen company data. He had IT personnel create false logs, suggesting that I had accessed systems without authorization. He had human resources staff sign off on a termination for cause letter that was based entirely on fabricated evidence." "And you couldn't fight back," I said. "I didn't have the resources to fight back," Amber said. "I didn't have expensive lawyers. I didn't have a network of powerful people willing to testify on my behalf. I didn't have anything except the knowledge that I had been destroyed by a man who valued his reputation more than he valued truth or justice." She handed me the USB drive. "I did this," she said, "not because I believe in justice. I did this not because I believe in truth or goodness or any of those noble concepts. I did this because I want to watch Lucas Moore suffer. I did this because I want to see him lose everything the way he made me lose everything. I did this because revenge is the only thing that makes sense to me anymore." I took the USB drive from her hand. "That's honest at least," I said. "Yes," Amber said. "That's the one thing I am, honest about my motivations. I'm not pretending to be a hero. I'm not pretending that this is about anything other than making Lucas pay for what he did to me. If that makes me a bad person, then so be it. At least I'm not a hypocrite about it." I didn't respond. I couldn't respond. The fact that someone outside of my family had arrived at the same conclusion that I had arrived at after my mother told me the truth was shocking to me. "I don't know if I can prove it," Amber continued, "but the financial data shows a clear pattern. Maintenance costs dropped dramatically 6 years ago, right before your brother took over. Maintenance costs are still lower than they were when your father was in charge. And I think that's not a coincidence. After I met with Amber, I knew that I needed a lawyer. I needed someone who understood corporate fraud and who could help me determine whether the information on the USB drive was enough to support a legal action against my brother. I reached out to Nathan Brooks at a time when he was not expecting to hear from me. I had obtained his personal cell phone number through a former colleague at Moore Harvest, who had remained in contact with me over the years. I called him on a Tuesday afternoon, and when he answered, I could hear the tension in his voice immediately. "Ms. Moore," he said, recognizing my voice even though we had not spoken in several years. "I was not expecting to hear from you." "I need your help," I said, without preamble. "I need legal counsel on a matter related to Moore Harvest." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I can't help you," Nathan said, and the resignation in his voice was palpable. "I'm sorry, but I can't help you with anything related to Moore Harvest." "Why not?" I asked. "Because," Nathan said, "it's complicated. Because I have obligations to my client that prevent me from assisting anyone who might have an adversarial interest to that client. Because I'm bound by attorney-client privilege and by professional ethical obligations." "Is your client Moore Harvest or your client Lucas Moore?" I asked. "It's complicated," Nathan said again. But this time, there was something else in his voice. There was a note of vulnerability, of someone who knew that they were trapped and who was hoping that someone might offer them a way out. "I need to meet with you," I said. "I need to explain something to you. And I think once I do, you'll understand why you need to help me, and why helping me is actually the best thing you could possibly do for yourself." Nathan agreed to meet with me, though I could hear the reluctance in his voice. We met at a hotel restaurant in Portland, far enough away from Salem and from Moore Harvest that we were unlikely to be recognized or seen together by anyone who might report back to Lucas. When Nathan arrived, I could see that he had aged since I last saw him. He looked like a man who was carrying a significant burden, who was sleeping poorly, who was living with constant stress and anxiety. He looked like a man who was being blackmailed. "I know what's happening," I said to him before he even had a chance to sit down. "I know that Lucas has leverage over you. I know that you're being forced to cooperate with him because of something in your past, something that could result in professional consequences for you." Nathan's face went pale. He looked like someone who had just been exposed, who had just had his carefully constructed secrets brought into the light. "Sit down," I said to him. "Let me explain why helping me is actually the best way to protect yourself." Nathan sat down slowly, as if the weight of what I was saying was physically pressing down on him. 2 years ago, I continued, you helped Lucas navigate a particularly complex financial transaction. During that transaction, you made certain professional decisions that, in hindsight, could be construed as assisting in the commission of fraud. Lucas discovered this. Lucas documented this. And Lucas has been using this information to ensure your continued cooperation and your silence. "How do you know this?" Nathan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because I've been investigating Moore Harvest," I said. "Because I've been talking to people who have been victimized by Lucas's actions. Because I have access to information that suggests a systematic pattern of corruption at Moore Harvest that goes back years." Nathan put his head in his hands. "I'm trapped," he said. "Do you understand? I'm completely trapped. Lucas has me exactly where he wants me. He has documentation of my involvement in a transaction that could result in the loss of my law license. He has leverage that he can use to ensure that I remain silent about whatever he's doing. I can't escape this situation. There is no way out for me." "Yes, there is," I said. "There is a way out, but it requires you to be willing to take a risk. It requires you to be willing to cooperate with me in exposing Lucas and Moore Harvest." "That would destroy me," Nathan said. "That would result in the loss of my license, prosecution, and imprisonment." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe if you cooperate with authorities before they come looking for you. if you demonstrate that you were coerced into participating in fraud by Lucas, if you provide evidence against him, then you might be able to negotiate immunity or a reduced sentence. You might be able to save yourself. I leaned across the table. But here's what I know, I continued. I know that Lucas will eventually face consequences for what he's done. I know that his fraud is too extensive, too documented, too well evidenced to remain hidden forever. And when Lucas faces those consequences, when authorities come looking for everyone who assisted him, you're going to be caught in the net with him. And at that point, you won't have any leverage. You won't have any negotiating position. You'll just be another accessory to his crimes. Nathan looked at me, and I could see the calculation happening in his mind. I could see him weighing his options. I could see him understanding that his situation was untenable, that there was no sustainable way for him to continue as he had been. If I help you, Nathan said slowly, what exactly would I be helping with? I need you to help me understand the financial transactions that Lucas has engaged in, I said. I need you to help me interpret the documents that I have access to. I need you to help me build a case that can be presented to authorities. And eventually, I might need you to testify, though I'll do everything I can to minimize that exposure. Nathan was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and he took the USB drive that I had placed there. I'll look at this, he said, but I can't promise anything. I need to understand what we're dealing with before I can commit to helping you. And I need to be very careful about how I do this, because if Lucas finds out that I'm working with you, he will destroy me. He's going to destroy you anyway, I said. The only question is whether you'll help yourself in the process. I looked at Nathan for a long moment, and then I understood what I needed to do. I have information, I said, pulling out the USB drive. That suggests that the financial issues at Moore Harvest go back much further than 2 years. I have information that suggests that Lucas has been engaged in accounting fraud for at least 6 years. I have information that suggests that he has been manipulating financial data to conceal the true operational costs of the company. Why are you telling me this? Nathan asked. Because, I said, if you help me expose Lucas, then you have the opportunity to protect yourself. You have the opportunity to cooperate with authorities before they come looking for you. You have the opportunity to demonstrate that you were coerced into participating in fraud by Lucas, which might mitigate your liability. Nathan didn't respond. He just looked at the USB drive on the table between us. And if I don't help you, he asked, then you'll continue to be Lucas's prisoner, I said. Then you'll continue to be someone who helped cover up fraud and who stands to lose everything when the truth eventually comes out. Because the truth will come out. I'm going to make sure of it. Nathan reached across the table and he picked up the USB drive. I'll look at this, he said. But I can't promise anything. I need to understand what we're dealing with before I can commit to helping you. Over the next month, Nathan and I worked together in secret. We examined the financial data that Amber had provided. We cross-referenced it with Moore Harvest's official financial statements. We began to build a picture of systematic fraud that went back years. We discovered that Lucas had been manipulating the company's books for at least 6 years. We discovered that he had been inflating revenue numbers and understating expenses. We discovered that he had been diverting company funds to shell companies and offshore accounts. We discovered that he had been systematically robbing Moore Harvest in order to enrich himself. But most importantly, we discovered that the maintenance cuts that had led to my father's death were part of a larger pattern. The maintenance cuts had been just one of many cost-cutting measures that Lucas had implemented in order to increase the company's apparent profitability. With this information in hand, I made a decision. I decided that I was going to force Moore Harvest to confront the truth about what my brother had done. I decided that I was going to use the Halloween gala that was scheduled for later that year as the venue for the revelation. Moore Harvest held a gala every year on Halloween. It was a tradition that dated back to my father's time. The gala was designed to celebrate the company's harvest season and to honor the agricultural traditions that the company was built upon. It was always held on October 31st. It was always a significant event in Salem's social calendar. This year's gala was going to be special. This year's gala was going to celebrate the sale of Moore Harvest to a major Japanese agricultural conglomerate. This year's gala was going to mark the end of the Moore family's involvement with the company that they had founded 60 years ago. And this year's gala was going to be the moment when the truth about my father's death and about my brother's fraud would be revealed. The night of the Halloween gala arrived cold and clear. It was October 31st, exactly 3 years to the day after my father's death. It was the kind of evening that felt heavy with significance, with destiny, with the sense that the natural world itself was conspiring to witness what was about to happen. The temperature had dropped significantly over the past week, and there was a feeling in the air that something significant was about to occur, something irreversible, something that would forever divide the timeline of my family's story into a before and an after. The gala was held at Moore Harvest corporate headquarters, a modern building made primarily of glass and steel, designed by an architect who had apparently believed that corporate success should be reflected in maximalist architecture. The building was decorated with elaborate Halloween decorations that seemed somewhat incongruous with the building's sleek modernity. Pumpkins arranged on marble counters, corn stalks positioned in glass vases, strings of orange and purple lights strung from ceiling to floor. The guests had been invited to wear costumes and masks, which created a surreal, dreamlike atmosphere where reality seemed uncertain, where people could pretend to be something other than what they actually were, where the truth could be hidden beneath layers of costume and performance. I arrived at the gala at 9 o'clock in the evening, accompanied by neither fanfare nor announcement. I was wearing a black dress that had cost me a significant portion of my savings, not out of vanity, but because I wanted to feel powerful, wanted to feel like I was equal to whatever was about to unfold. I was wearing a mask made to look like a raven, a bird that my father had always been fascinated by, a bird that he claimed was a symbol of wisdom and transformation. I was there to witness what was about to happen, though I was not the person who would be orchestrating the revelation. That role had been assigned to Nathan and Amber, who were positioned throughout the building like chess pieces waiting to execute a complex maneuver. My brother was already holding court in the main ballroom, surrounded by important business figures and media representatives. He was wearing a costume that made him look like a harvest king, golden robes that probably cost more than my first car, a crown made of what appeared to be genuine gold, the full regalia of someone who believed himself to be royalty. He was in high spirits, animated and confident. He was clearly pleased with the direction his life was taking, clearly satisfied with the choices he had made, clearly convinced that he had successfully covered up any evidence of wrongdoing, and that he would be able to spend the rest of his life enjoying the fruits of his father's labor and his own corruption. Looking at him, I tried to feel anger. I tried to summon the rage that had sustained me for the past 3 years. But what I felt instead was sadness, profound sadness for the man my brother had become. Sadness for the potential he had squandered. Sadness for the legacy he had destroyed. Sadness for the fact that he had felt the need to poison himself with greed and ambition, and the desperate need to prove something to a father who was already dead, and who would never acknowledge his success no matter how much he achieved. At precisely 9:30, Lucas took the stage. He was holding a signed contract, holding it up as if it were a trophy, as if the paper itself was a representation of his accomplishment. He was announcing that More Harvest had been sold to the Japanese conglomerate for a sum of money that was significantly higher than what anyone had expected. Over $400 million, a number so large that it became abstract, became something that existed more in the realm of fantasy than of reality. Tonight, Lucas said, his voice projecting across the ballroom with the kind of confidence that only comes from someone who has never truly faced consequences for their actions. We celebrate the culmination of a vision that began 60 years ago with our founder, Edward Moore. We celebrate the transformation of a small agricultural company into a global enterprise. We celebrate the future of More Harvest under new leadership that will take this company to heights that we can only imagine. My father would be proud if he could see what we have accomplished together as a family. The lie of that last statement hung in the air like poison. My father would not be proud. My father had died trying to stop exactly what Lucas had accomplished. My father had died because he had discovered that his son was willing to destroy the company's integrity, the company's values, and the company's safety protocols in order to increase quarterly earnings. The crowd applauded. People raised their glasses in celebration. For a moment, it seemed as though everything was going to proceed as planned, with no interruption, with no revelation of the truth about what had transpired. And then, Amber sent the signal through her secure communication system. Nathan, who was watching from a control room in another part of the building, activated the computer systems that would allow us to take control of the presentation system in the ballroom. The lights in the ballroom began to flicker. The ambient music that had been playing cut out abruptly, and then, on the massive screen behind Lucas, an image began to appear. It was an email. It was addressed to the board of directors. It was dated from 6 years ago. It was from Lucas to the board, explaining that he had decided to cut maintenance costs on the grain silos in order to improve the company's quarterly earnings. Lucas's face went pale. He looked up at the screen, and I could see the moment when he understood that his secret was about to be exposed publicly. "There seems to be a technical glitch," he said, trying to maintain control of the situation. "These are private company communications. Whoever is responsible for this interruption will face severe legal consequences." But the presentation continued. More emails appeared on the screen, more documents, more evidence of fraud and financial manipulation, more documentation of the decisions that had led to my father's death. And then, a video began to play. The video showed an interview with Robert Hale, the independent auditor who had been hired to conduct a routine audit of More Harvest several years earlier. The video showed Robert explaining how he had discovered evidence of accounting irregularities during his audit. The video showed Robert explaining how he had reported his findings to Lucas. The video showed Robert explaining that Lucas had then done everything in his power to discredit him and to prevent him from sharing his findings with the authorities. "I was fired," Robert said in the video, his voice calm and measured. "I was threatened with lawsuits. I was told that if I spoke about what I had discovered, I would be prosecuted for defamation. But I documented everything. I have records of every finding, and I am prepared to testify about what I discovered during my audit of More Harvest." The video cut to another interview, this one with a representative from the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. The representative explained how the investigation into my father's death had been influenced by legal pressure from More Harvest. The representative explained how certain evidence had been suppressed. The representative explained how the investigation had been designed to reach a predetermined conclusion, rather than to discover the truth. In the ballroom, chaos had erupted. People were standing up, trying to understand what was happening. Security personnel were rushing toward the stage, trying to stop the presentation. Journalists were pulling out their phones to record the images on the screen. But I had positioned myself near the stage, and as security personnel rushed past, I was able to reach Lucas before anyone could stop me. I looked at my brother, and I saw fear in his eyes. I saw the fear of a man who understood that his carefully constructed world was about to collapse. "This was you," he said to me, and it was not a question. "It was me," I confirmed. "It was me, and it was Amber, and it was Nathan, and it was everyone else who was tired of your lies. It was everyone else who believed that the truth was more important than your reputation." "You've destroyed everything," Lucas said. "You've destroyed the company. You've destroyed the family. You've destroyed your mother." "No," I said. "You destroyed everything. You destroyed it when you cut corners on maintenance to improve your quarterly earnings. You destroyed it when you confronted Dad about your decision, and Dad refused to accept your excuses. You destroyed it when your negligence created the circumstances that led to Dad's death. I'm just revealing what you destroyed." The image on the screen changed one more time. This time, it was a photograph of my father. It was a photograph from years ago, showing him with his arm around Lucas, both of them smiling at the camera. It was a photograph from a time when my brother was not yet consumed by his ambition. And in that moment, I saw my mother stand up. I saw her look at the photograph. I saw her realize, fully and completely, what her silence had cost her. The emergency board meeting was called for the next morning. The boardroom was filled with confusion and fear, and the overwhelming sense that something fundamental had shifted overnight. The board members were sitting around a massive table made of dark wood. There were lawyers present. There were accountants present. There were people from the Japanese conglomerate that had agreed to purchase more harvest, though the sale was now in jeopardy given the revelations of the previous evening. Lucas was present, but he was no longer in charge. The board had temporarily suspended him from his duties, pending an investigation into the allegations of fraud and financial manipulation. Nathan Brooks presented the evidence. He presented the emails. He presented the financial documents. He presented the testimony of Robert Hale and the representative from the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. He presented everything that we had gathered over the past month. Amber presented the server logs that showed the pattern of financial manipulation over the years. She explained how the logs had been created and maintained. She explained how she had accessed them after she was fired. She explained that the logs were authentic and that they could be verified independently by any competent computer forensics expert. I presented the timeline of events that had led to my father's death. I explained how my father had discovered that Lucas had cut maintenance costs on the grain silos. I explained how my father had confronted Lucas about this decision. I explained how my father had died when the silo exploded, at least partially as a result of Lucas's cost-cutting measures. The board listened to all of this in silence. The board members exchanged looks with each other. I could see the calculations happening in their minds. I could see them understanding that Lucas Moore had committed fraud and that his negligence had, at least indirectly, led to my father's death. The first person to speak after my presentation was Patricia Harrison, the chairman of the board. Patricia was an older woman, probably in her 70s, who had known my father and who had worked with the company for many years. "I need to ask something," Patricia said, "and I need to have a straight answer. Are you suggesting that Lucas deliberately caused the silo to explode? Are you suggesting that Lucas intended for your father to die?" "No," I said. I'm suggesting that Lucas made a decision to cut maintenance costs in order to improve quarterly earnings. I'm suggesting that this decision made the silo less safe. I'm suggesting that my father discovered this decision and confronted Lucas about it. I'm suggesting that my father died as a result of the less safe conditions that Lucas's cost-cutting had created. Whether that constitutes deliberate intent to cause harm is something for the authorities to determine. Patricia nodded slowly. She understood the distinction I was making. Lucas spoke for the first time since the meeting had begun. "These are allegations," he said, his voice tight. "These are accusations without proof. These are rumors and speculation. I demand that the board treat them as such. I demand that the board recognize that I have built this company into something greater than it has ever been. I demand that the board consider my track record of achievement and success." "Your track record," Patricia said quietly, "also includes the fact that your father died under circumstances that we now understand were at least partially caused by your decisions. Your track record includes the fact that you then engaged in systematic fraud to conceal the true financial situation of the company. Your track record is not achievement and success. Your track record is corruption and negligence." Patricia looked at the other board members. I could see the consensus forming. I could see them arriving at the same conclusion. "Lucas Moore," Patricia said formally, "the board has voted to suspend you indefinitely from your position as Chief Executive Officer. The board has voted to direct that all evidence of financial fraud and accounting irregularities be reported to the Securities and Exchange Commission and to federal law enforcement. The board has voted to recommend that you cooperate fully with any investigation into these matters." Lucas looked like he was about to speak, but no words came out. He looked like a man who was watching his life collapse in real time. My mother was present at the meeting, though she had not been invited. She had insisted on attending. She had insisted on witnessing what happened. And when Patricia made her announcement, I saw my mother reach out and grasp my hand. "I should have done this," my mother whispered to me. "I should have done this 3 years ago, instead of protecting the company. I should have protected your father's memory instead." "You're doing it now," I said. "That's what matters." After the board meeting, I was approached by one of the lawyers present. He told me that the Securities and Exchange Commission was already beginning to investigate Moore Harvest. He told me that federal prosecutors were considering bringing charges against Lucas for fraud and securities violations. He told me that it was likely that Lucas would face significant prison time if the charges were filed and if he was convicted. I didn't feel satisfaction when I heard this news. I didn't feel triumph. I felt sadness. I felt sadness for my brother who had destroyed himself through his own greed and ambition. I felt sadness for my mother, who had been forced to choose between protecting my father's memory and protecting the company. I felt sadness for the fact that my father's death could not be undone, that no amount of justice could bring him back. But I also felt something else. I felt peace. I felt the knowledge that I had done what I set out to do. I had told the truth. I had exposed the fraud. I had forced my family and my company to confront the lies that had been hiding beneath the surface for so long. 1 year later, I was standing in the garden of my family's home in Salem. The garden had been neglected for the past 4 years. It had been neglected since my father's death, but over the past year, I had been working to restore it. I had planted new crops. I had removed the dead plants. I had cleaned up the debris and the decay. I had transformed the garden from a place of abandonment into a place of growth and potential. Most significantly, I had replanted the pumpkin patch that my father had maintained for decades. I had obtained seeds from the same supplier that my father had used for years. I had planted them in the same location, where he had taught me about how seeds need darkness to grow. My mother was with me in the garden. She was kneeling beside me, her hands in the soil, helping me prepare the ground for the final planting of the season. "Your father would be proud," she said to me as we worked. "I think he would," I said. "I think he would understand why I did what I did. I think he would understand that I had to expose the truth, even though it meant destroying the company that he had built." "The company is not destroyed," my mother said. "The company is being rebuilt. The company is being transformed into something better, something cleaner, something more honest than it was before." It was true. More Harvest had not been destroyed by the revelation of Lucas's fraud. Instead, it had been transformed. The board had brought in new leadership. The board had implemented new oversight procedures. The board had committed to full transparency and accountability. The company was in the process of rebuilding its reputation based on honesty, rather than on the concealment of wrongdoing. The Japanese conglomerate had reconsidered their offer to purchase More Harvest. They had decided to proceed, but on different terms. They had decided to retain the Moore family name and heritage, rather than rebranding the company as they had originally planned. And I had been offered a position on the board. I had been offered the opportunity to help guide the company into this new era of transparency and accountability. After initially refusing, I had accepted the position. I had accepted it because I understood that I had a responsibility to help restore what my brother had damaged and what my father had lost when he died. Lucas was currently awaiting trial on charges of securities fraud and wire fraud. He had pled guilty to lesser charges of accounting irregularities, hoping to reduce his sentence. The prosecutor was recommending a minimum prison sentence of 5 years, with the possibility of up to 20 years, depending on how aggressively they decided to pursue the charges. Nathan Brooks had not faced any charges. His cooperation with the investigation had been valued by the authorities, and they had decided that prosecuting him would serve no one's interests. He had been allowed to keep his law license, though his reputation in the legal community had suffered significantly as a result of his involvement with More Harvest and Lucas's fraud. Amber Pierce had been asked by the SEC to testify about the server logs and the data that she had provided. She had agreed to do so, and she had provided testimony that had been instrumental in establishing the case against Lucas. She was now working as a consultant for More Harvest, helping to implement new data security and privacy practices. Robert Hale, the independent auditor who had been fired for attempting to expose the accounting irregularities, had been offered his job back. He had declined the offer, but he had been hired as a consultant by the board to help ensure that the company's financial practices were transparent and compliant with all applicable regulations. The foundation of the pumpkin patch was fertile and rich. The soil was dark and moist, perfect for growing pumpkins. I pressed the seeds into the ground carefully, one at a time, making sure that each seed was planted at the correct depth and spacing. My father had taught me how to plant pumpkins when I was 7 years old. He had told me that seeds need darkness to grow. He had told me that the darkness is not a punishment, but a necessary part of the growth process. He had told me that once the seeds have spent enough time in darkness, they eventually emerge into the light. I had spent 3 years in darkness, away from Salem, away from my family, away from More Harvest. I had spent 3 years carrying the knowledge of what had happened to my father, carrying the weight of my brother's negligence, carrying the burden of my mother's silence. And then I had emerged from the darkness. I had returned to Salem. I had exposed the truth. I had forced my family and my company to confront the lies that had been hiding beneath the surface, and now I was planting seeds again. I was planting seeds in the same garden where my father had taught me that growth requires darkness. I was planting seeds in the knowledge that from the darkness will eventually come growth. From the concealment will come truth. From the death that my father experienced will come new life, new possibility, new hope. I finished planting the last seed. I stood up and I looked at what I had created. I looked at the garden that my father had loved. I looked at the place where I had played as a child. I looked at the place where my father had taught me about the fundamental truths of life. And I understood that I had done more than expose fraud. I had done more than bring justice to those who had been wronged. I had done more than force my brother to face the consequences of his actions. I had restored something that had been broken. I had healed something that had been damaged. I had transformed a place of death and concealment into a place of growth and truth. The pumpkins would grow in the darkness beneath the soil. They would develop slowly, hidden from the light, protected by the earth. And then, when they were ready, they would emerge into the light. They would become visible. They would become something that could be seen and admired and appreciated. My father would have understood this. My father would have understood that I was doing what he had taught me to do. I was allowing the seeds to grow in the darkness, and I was trusting that the truth would eventually emerge into the light. I looked at the calendar hanging on the garden shed. It was October. It was almost Halloween again. It was almost the anniversary of my father's death, the day when the truth about what had happened had finally been exposed. And I realized that I was ready to let go of the past. I was ready to stop carrying the weight of my brother's crimes. I was ready to stop being defined by what had happened 3 years ago. I was ready to move forward into whatever came next. My mother put her arm around me, and together we walked out of the garden. Behind us, in the dark soil, the pumpkin seeds were beginning their journey toward the light. Behind us, beneath the earth, the future was being born. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that my father would be proud of what I had done. I knew that he would understand that the truth was worth revealing, even if the truth meant destroying the company he had built. I knew that he would understand that integrity was more important than reputation, that honesty was more important than profit, that doing the right thing was more important than maintaining the appearance of having done the right thing. Justice is not always clean. Justice is not always simple. Justice does not always result in triumph or celebration. Sometimes justice simply means telling the truth and accepting the consequences of that truth. But telling the truth is its own form of victory. Speaking the truth is its own form of power. And transforming the world through the revelation of truth is its own form of redemption. I had come back to Salem to expose the fraud that had destroyed my father. I had come back to Salem to reveal the lies that had been concealed beneath the surface for so long. I had come back to Salem to demand justice. And in seeking justice for my father, I had found something unexpected. I had found healing. I had found peace. I had found the ability to move forward into the future without being haunted by the past. The seeds had been planted. The darkness had begun its work. And soon, very soon, the harvest would come. The truth would emerge, and the world would see what had been hidden in the darkness all along. This is my story. This is the story of how I learned that some things can only grow in darkness, and that the most beautiful harvests often come from seeds that have spent years invisible and underground. This is the story of how I learned that truth, no matter how long it takes to emerge, will always find the light.